So today's sermon, I'm going to give you a quick 6-minute version. If you're old, by the way, and went to the University of Tennessee, you'll recognize that logo. It was a bar and restaurant on the Strip in Knoxville way back in the day. So at any rate, what I want to talk about is the cognitive dissonance, which is the idea that sometimes what we believe and what we, quote, know gets in the way of new information and our ability to process new information appropriately. And so it can become an issue for us. And I think in all three of the lessons that we had today, I see that very thing. So the first lesson was Ezekiel 2:2-5. So God sends Ezekiel and says, go tell the people of Israel, you're going to go be their prophet and say, thus says the Lord. You're going to authenticate yourself by saying, I'm speaking for God here. And then you're going to tell them they need to go into exile. And they need to give up on the dream and the idea that all will be well. So the reality is there's about a 10-year period between the first exile and the setting up the vassal king by Babylon. And so Ezekiel's gone. He's up in Babylon already. But there's still a group of people who've stayed behind. And they have had false prophets who've come to them and said, all will be well. The temple's still there, blah, blah, blah. So everything's going to be fine. And this will be just a few minutes. Jeremiah was completely wrong when he said you'd be there 70 years. No. Just hang on. Help's coming. And Ezekiel's job is to go and say, no, it's not. I'm speaking for the Lord. These other guys are speaking for themselves. And God says at the end, look, he says that they're not going to listen to you because they're rebellious. He says, but don't worry about that. Ultimately, they're going to know that a prophet came among them. So I'm going to authenticate you. So 10 years pass, boom, another rebellion. Everybody goes into exile. Temple's destroyed. But the cognitive dissonance of the hope that it's going to be restored, because it's what we want, right? I mean, we don't like that liminality, which is a sense of the normal, the everyday, the stuff you take for granted has been shaken. And now all I want is to go back to that previous state. But you can't. And so you got to accept the new state. But the problem is, as long as that temple's still there, they still have hope that it's going to stay. And that ultimately, just in a few minutes, will be restored to the land. So the cognitive dissonance then keeps them from being able to hear Ezekiel's prophecy. Same way that the northern kingdom, before it was taken into captivity by Assyria, they can't hear Amos. They're wealthy, things are going well, everything's good. They can't hear God's judgments on you. So this cognitive dissonance keeps us from being able to assimilate new information and then appropriately react to it. You see the same thing again in the gospel. Jesus has done all these incredible things in the last couple of weeks that we've seen. He's healed the woman with the issue of blood. He raised the daughter of Jairus from the dead. It wasn't in view because we didn't read it, but in between weeks, he calmed the storm, and then he went to the land of the Gerasenes and delivered a man from a legion of demons. So now he goes to his hometown and he begins to preach, and they begin to ask questions. Where did this guy get this stuff? Where did this come from? Where does he get this great wisdom? Where does he get this great power? And so they're asking the right questions, but then they let what they know. Hey, wait a minute. That's the carpenter's son. We know his whole family. We know everything about him. So the cognitive dissonance comes in with trying to answer those other questions filtered through what they know. Now, did they know Mary's story, right? Did they know that she claimed to be a virgin who had a child? Does she know? Do they know that this is potentially God's child? Maybe you take that information into account to try and figure out what's going on here. But it's hard, to do that because we let the things that we know get in the way. And so their cognitive dissonance is, well, he can't possibly be that. So they reject the new experiential information. We know these things happened, and we've just heard him teach. So we know that he has a wisdom beyond anything anybody could ever imagine. However, we know all this stuff. So we're going to reject the new information and the implications of that new information on the basis of what we already know. And it was a constant problem for Jesus. It was this cognitive dissonance was, he can't possibly be that guy. He's not doing the things we expect the Messiah to do, so he can't be the Messiah. He's not setting up the government. He's not driving out the Romans. He's not doing any of these things. So he can't possibly be the Messiah. Peter confesses him as Messiah. 15 minutes later, he's telling him, hey, this crucifixion thing, no, buddy, you don't know. You, the Messiah, don't know. Peter believed, and he knew Messiahs didn't suffer. Messiahs didn't go to the cross. And he let that get in the way of what he had already said. And so God has to take him and James and John up on a mountain and give him a new revelation. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. Okay? So God has to break through our cognitive dissonance in order for us to do this. Sometimes he does it by allowing the worst possible things to happen. Right? So the problem is that sometimes he allows the worst thing to happen, which is what happened in that first lesson. It's destroyed. You've got to have the illusion shattered. You have to become disillusioned, because your illusion is keeping you from seeing the truth and living in the reality. And so we see that again in the epistle. Paul, not in the part we read this week, but what would have been right before this. Paul's defending his apostleship against these who would call themselves the super apostles. So he's told the story of being taken up into the third heaven. And he said, but the problem is that I would probably have become full of myself. I was this prophet, this apostle, this guy who has received this mystical revelation of heaven. I know stuff, and I've seen stuff that nobody else has ever seen before. So when I came out of that experience, God did this weird thing, and he gave me this thorn in the flesh. And we don't know what that is. We have no idea what he's talking about. He's not clear. He doesn't give us any indication what he might mean by that. He said, but and 3 times I asked God to take this thing away from me. And God said, no, I'm not going to do it. Why? Because in your weakness, and this thing's making you weak, in your weakness, then my strength is made manifest. And Paul says, you know what? He gets over the cognitive dissonance of, I can't be effective if I'm having to deal with this thorn in the flesh. He deals with that when God gives him that response. And he says, okay, then I'll boast evermore in my weakness. So these super apostles are boasting in their strength, and they're using Paul's weakness as a cudgel against him. And Paul says, no, that's my strength. That is my strength. That's my superpower. That's my superpower. Because that's when God steps in and God takes over and God does all the stuff. So I don't know where you are in your life. I don't know what's going on in your life. If you're like me, there's probably been things in your life that you prayed for long seasons of time and God never took them away. God never changed your circumstances. He left you where you were. It's probably a huge part of your faith story today, is that pain, that difficulty. So maybe what God's saying to you is, hey, I need that to be in your life so that you can make me known instead of making you known. But assimilating new information always requires us to hold fast to what's there, but to accept new truth and allow that to modify what we already have. Just, it's as simple as that. And Jesus is the great one. And then the cognitive dissonance for Christians should always come with, how does that fit with the revelation of Jesus? How does my life, how do things in my life fit around the revelation of who Jesus is and what he has done for me? We have to let that be the interpretive key for everything else. God bless.